A few years ago, the Jehovah's Witness leadership realized they had a crippling problem on their hands. Apostates. See, for years, apostates were holding signs in front of conventions that said John 1:1 and Jesus is God. And for the most part, Jehovah's Witnesses and the leadership ignored them, kind of laughed, and almost treated them in a very disparaging way. But with the modern rise and spread of information via the internet, Watchtower saw a wave coming that they maybe didn't even realize just how powerful of a force it is. Now, back in 2018, they set up a department specialized to handle this problem. And notice what they said at their 2018 annual meeting.
But as Satan intensifies his slanderous attacks on Jehovah's people and opposers feed authorities with twisted and distorted statements about us, OPI's assignment now includes conveying accurate words of truth to government officials.
Clearly, the organization saw the dangers of apostates not just waving signs around convention centers, but petitioning their local governments and talking to journalists and media outlets about the real problems going on inside the organization. And seeing how Watchtower has handled this over the last few years and their complete failure actually gives me a lot of hope that apostates are actually winning. So let's talk about it. Now, before we break down how Jehovah's Witnesses are reacting to the pressure from apostates, I want to lay the foundation, which will encompass some other aspects of this as well, so just bear with me for a little bit. But first, I want to talk about my own personal experience and how my waking up from my Jehovah's Witness indoctrination was sort of kind of fueled by stuff that I didn't even know I was consuming. And so to talk about that, we have to talk about how memory works. Now, I'm no neurological expert here, but it's my basic understanding that your subconscious has an incredible ability to remember all manner of details that you're not able to grasp or hold on to. A good example of this is your dreams. You can dream about someone that you haven't seen in 10 years. Now, if I were to ask you when's the last time you saw Jill Sanders, you would be like, wouldn't know. What was she wearing? Heck, if I know, what was her hairstyle? Was she wearing glasses? What color were they? And yet when you have a dream, you have this fully fleshed out memory of Jill Sanders, even though you haven't thought about her in 10 years. And she just pops in your dream like an NPC. You remember the way she sounds, the way she looks, what she was wearing, all of these fine details. Think about just the world you build in your dreams. Every light post, every texture, every building are things that you have seen in your day-to-day life that your brain was holding on to without you being aware. Why am I talking about dreams and memory? Well, when I was a Jehovah's Witness, on my news app on my phone, I always had a feed for anything that Jehovah's Witness related. So if something popped up on the news that was talking about Jehovah's Witnesses, I would know about it. And this was never problematic for me. Now, an incredible thing happened in 2014 and 2015, and it really speaks to the cognitive dissonance of Jehovah's Witnesses. I turned off that notification feed for Jehovah's Witnesses. I didn't consciously think about why. There wasn't a reason for it. I just turned it off. I just, I don't need this. Boom. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that I realized why. Is because I started seeing things that were disruptive to my faith. Jehovah's Witnesses and their handling of child sex abuse being one of them. The Australian Royal Commission being a very big one. And over and over and over again, instead of just saying, oh, Jehovah's Witnesses are having a convention and the city is so happy, I started to see negative things. And without even processing this information in my conscious mind, I just turned the feed off. Well, eventually, when I woke up, guess what were some of the very first things that I thought about? I remembered all of those little tiny details, all of those child sex abuse cases and all over the country, across the world, the Australian Royal Commission, and I really dove deep into understanding exactly what those were about. Now, I say all this because I think that a crucial aspect of people waking up from their indoctrination is all of these things happening below the surface. They don't even realize that something is triggering their mental fight or flight response. And unfortunately for Jehovah's Witnesses, the tendency is to just flee. You don't want to think about anything that would break your indoctrination. So very few Jehovah's Witnesses actually want to fight and say, oh, well, let me prove this wrong. Very rare. But all of those little pieces, they matter. They make a huge impact in the building of a foundation. When someone does have that moment where they say, something just seems a little bit off here, boom, it kicks in. And just like Jill Sanders, you have all of these memories just stored away and ready for you to finally put to good use. Now, I am certainly not unique in this, but from my personal experience and from what I've heard from other people, they share a similar experience. And that is one of the truly valuable things when it comes to what apostates do. When you go to your local journalist, someone that works at the newspaper, your local government, you bring issues that are currently going on inside of the Watchtower organization or that have gone on inside the organization, and you can do whatever you can to spread that information. It makes a big difference because it could be a tiny building block in what hundreds of thousands, millions of Jehovah's Witnesses around the world might store away, like the shirt Jill Sanders was wearing for a later day. Goose, you need to get a grip. Now, I wanted to tell my backstory here just because I think it adds credence to the value of apostates doing, well, apostate things. And it's a very difficult thing to quantify the efficacy of what apostates do. Some people will make a YouTube video that takes them a few hours to put together and call that a life-saving work. Another person puts together a YouTube video that takes them a couple hours and says it's entertainment and made to make people giggle. One person says there is no greater apostating that you can do than stand in front of a convention and holding up signs with loudspeakers. Another person will say that goes against everything. That actually hurts what real apostates are doing. One person says, I think it's a good idea to go up to Jehovah's Witnesses when they're standing at their carts and have a conversation with them. Another person says, no, that only further keeps them in their indoctrination. There are people that say there's no point in going to your local government or talking to anyone because no one really cares about Jehovah's Witnesses and you're just wasting your time in the long run. Why don't you just move on with your life? There are other people that go to their local journalists or their local legislation and get laws changed. So there's a wide spectrum here about everyone's idea of what the value of apostating really is. Now, I'm not here to slap the stamp of approval. This is certified apostate material right here. We're not trying to trade. Actually, that's kind of a fire trademark. I'm a certified apostate. Hey, I wanna be a rock star. Anyway, my brain takes off too fast. Anyway, what I wanted to do in order to try and get an understanding of what the effect is actually having, that maybe all of us could pretty much agree on, is look at Watchtower's reaction. So if we look from circa 2014, 2015, with the rise of people making YouTube videos about them bringing to light the problems within not only social media, but within larger media as well, and people bringing these issues to a national or a global platform. What effect has it had? Well, I think the thing we can look at is how Watchtower has responded. What has Watchtower done? Because if it wasn't having any effect, then I would say they would do absolutely nothing. They wouldn't change anything. They would be wholly unmoved to lift a finger if it wasn't having any effect. And if they were trying to counteract what was being said to governments and to news outlets, and it wasn't working, then they would continue to modify and change as much as they could in order to say that, oh, no, they're just spreading misinformation. But in reality, Watchtower is slowly changing their doctrine to actually address these issues. And to me, that really seems to be the case. Now, let's jump back into what Paul Gillis had to say at this 2018 annual meeting. It's something that I had never seen before, but I think it really helps us get an understanding of what the Jehovah's Witnesses were, or how the Jehovah's Witnesses were responding to the rise of apostates doing certified apostate activities.
But now let me ask you this. Do you know what OPI stands for? You'll find out, and a lot more, in the following report, which will be given by Brother Paul Gillies, who serves as the overseer of OPI.
Ecclesiastes 12, verse 10 says, "The congregator sought to find delightful words and to record accurate words of truth." In harmony with this principle, the Office of Public Information, OPI, at World Headquarters has over the years been assigned by the governing body to convey accurate information to the news media and academics. But as Satan intensifies his slanderous attacks on Jehovah's people, and opposers feed authorities with twisted and distorted statements about us, OPI's assignment now includes conveying accurate words of truth to government officials.
Now, Watchtower was faced with a very tricky situation here. See, if you go and tell Jehovah's Witnesses exactly what is being said about you to these news agencies or governments, then people can evaluate the validity of that themselves. So they give this kind of nothing. Well, Satan is attacking, so this invisible spirit creature is attacking, okay, whatever that means, and he's using lies and mistruths and inaccuracies. But he doesn't actually specify what any of those things are. So what is happening is they are trying to condition the ordinary Jehovah's Witness to think kind of like I did, when anytime you hear something that is remotely negative or just sounds off, it doesn't have to be a headline that says, Watchtower is failing and we're gonna take them down. It could just be an honest report about X amount of CSA victims speak out against the abuse within the organization. And your brain is literally being molded by these guys to think that this is misinformation, that this is a false report. And they give you the comfort. We set up this OPI, give it a fancy sounding name for the value of loaded language. We set up the OPI because we're on the case. We know that you guys have been hearing some very negative things about us, but you don't have to worry because Watchtower is going to handle it. Now, it's a very delicate thing to try and do this for another reason, and he tries to get ahead of it because Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to be politically neutral, and yet they kind of say that they're going to be lobbying or talking to governments. Wouldn't that contradict their political neutrality?
There are scriptural precedents for contacting government officials. Jehovah positioned his servants before rulers in order to protect his people or to further his purposes. Examples include Joseph before Pharaoh, Nehemiah before King Artaxerxes, Esther and Mordecai before King Ahasuerus, and Paul before Felix. Of course, we do not need the permission of governments to meet and to preach, but we do recognize that having religious freedom and the cooperation of officials is conducive to spreading the kingdom message. While remaining politically neutral, we provide accurate information to kings and all those in high positions so that we may go on leading a calm and quiet life, as 1 Timothy 2, verse 2 states.
So them coming out and acknowledging that, hey, I know you guys might be scratching your heads and saying, I thought we were supposed to just remain politically neutral and the governments are just going to do whatever the governments are going to do. Jehovah's given them that power anyway. And as he said there, well, we don't need anyone's permission to do it, but we low-key kind of need their permission to do it. Maybe it's because they're a real estate company and not really a religious organization. But hey, we've already talked about that in other videos. But it's interesting that they had enough foresight to see that Jehovah's Witnesses will be asking some questions about how this is going to work. Wow, now we have an Office of Public Information. What is this? Anyway, so what this was essentially set up to do was to provide, as he said, accurate information. Well, how effective has this been? Well, it must not have been very effective, because it was only a few years after this that they set up another PR team, and they actually hired a PR professional in order to get the job done. This comes down to the whole saga of the PID and Robert Hendricks, which I've talked about in other videos.
And welcome to our quarterly meeting for the Public Information Department. And we know you brothers and sisters were working so hard on that 2-year no-knocking pitch. It was perhaps the most localized pitch we ever had ready.
We appreciate you being with us. We have the largest audience that we've ever had, and it's appropriate because it probably is the most important quarterly meeting we've ever had. Many hundreds, if not over 1,000 interviews later, we're at this place we are today.
Our next guest is the national spokesman for the Jehovah's Witnesses, Robert J. Hendricks III.
Joining us with some clarification on what they do and do not believe, welcome Robert Hendricks, U.S. spokesman for the Jehovah's Witness. Good morning.
And I am so delighted to welcome back on our show, Robert Hendricks, U.S. spokesperson for Jehovah's Witnesses. Robert, welcome back.
Me now is Robert Hendricks, and he is the U.S. spokesperson for Jehovah's Witnesses.
When we spoke to Robert J. Hendricks.
Robert Hendricks, national spokesperson for the Jehovah's Witnesses.
And Robert Hendricks is the U.S. spokesman for Jehovah's Witnesses.
Robert Hendricks to our program. He's the U.S. spokesman for Jehovah's Witnesses.
So this was the flashy new age of Watchtower, where they were going to take to Twitter to try and get the algorithms shifted so that way positive news stories would be at the top of everyone's news feeds whenever they search for anything Jehovah's Witness related. They were essentially trying to bury anything negative by flooding people with all kinds of positivity. Robert Hendricks was going around the country doing interviews on Zoom and sometimes even in person, talking about how nice Jehovah's Witnesses are, how good they are for the community. It was a PR puff piece everywhere. And in my opinion, this would have been a fairly productive strategy, except for that it puts them in the spotlight. It gets people talking about Jehovah's Witnesses. And Watchtower has so many problems that if people start talking about Jehovah's Witnesses, undoubtedly, in my opinion, someone knows someone that has had a negative experience with the organization. You could go up to just about any random 10 people, and I bet out of that random 10 people, there's one in that group that has a negative association with Jehovah's Witnesses. It might not be a big deal. It could be something as minor as, oh yeah, my family kind of grew up and we didn't get to celebrate holidays, but that was about it, and then we left, or something like that. It could be something a lot more serious, like, oh yeah, my cousins let their own kid die and not have a blood transfusion, and it broke the whole family apart, and everyone's on every type of psychotropic drug that you can possibly imagine now. It fundamentally ruined them. So the degree can vary, but I feel like there is a very large percentage of people that have been negatively affected by these tentacles of Watchtower. And I feel that Watchtower knew this, because the Public Information Department, from what I can tell, has scaled back on what their attempts were a few years ago. I don't see them popping up on news stations. I don't know really what happened to Robert Hendricks. I think he's somewhere in Florida now. I don't really know. Could only speculate. But that's neither really here nor there. But the point of this is Watchtower sets up two different departments, this OPI and this PID, in the span of only a couple of years. And my phone has an alarm that's going off, so this is a little awkward. And within the span of that couple of years, they have to completely change how they're doing it or even change names. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a new public information department rebranding here in the next couple of years, because they are clearly not effective. So when I look at Watchtower's response to what apostates are doing, and they are open about saying it, these opposers are going to governments and telling them their story, the governments are responding, and Watchtower is losing. Look at all of the examples that we have of all the negative media that just keeps coming out over and over again.
Apes together, strong.
So, if apostates are indeed winning, then it leads to the inevitable question of, well, what is the best way to do certified apostate activities? And that is a bit of a complicated question, but let's try and wade through this marshy quagmire of opinions. That doesn't sound very cool. We're going to talk about it. So what is the very best type of activism? Well, obviously there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all, because everyone has different types of skill sets and there are a lot of facets to this. But I think at its very baseline, we could say that activism is done best when it activates. So when it causes motion or a bit of commotion, I think we're going in the right direction. Now, particularly anytime that governments start investigating the practices of Watchtower, and the people that are bringing these issues to the light of governments are at the very forefront of activism. And then, I guess slightly below that, this isn't like a tier system or anything, but getting public awareness, attention, whether that be through journalism or anything else, that can be a very good medium for people to wonder, hey, what goes on inside of a Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses? Are they just the happy people that come to my door and wake me up on Saturday? Well, they don't really go preaching anymore, but you take my point. Now, as far as it pertains to me, a question that often I have dealt with or thought about is what I do, is sitting here in front of a microphone and my Canon activism. And I've always said, no, it's not. How could it be? I'm just a silly little guy making silly little videos. But as I was thinking about this, activism is the thing that activates. I kind of had to wonder if when people do see a face of someone publicly speaking out against the organization, despite knowing that it will have backlash, because if you do put your face out there, there's a bit of backlash. The first thing that I always think about is, well, this is going to make it harder for any of my family to ever leave the organization, because now there is this public anti-Watchtower guy out there that everyone knows about, everyone that's a Jehovah's Witness, and it's going to almost indoctrinate them even further, because they will be stubborn. They won't want to admit that I was right, and I bring up my family every so often in videos, and again, I think that almost works against them ever waking up. So there's the downfall from that. There's also just having to deal with backlash from things. It's not the easiest thing. I know we try our best to look at the overall of the situation, but sometimes, even if 90% of all of the comments and feedback you get are fairly positive, that 10% that's negative, or it's not even 10%, it's like 0.5%, those are the ones that always stick with you. For whatever reason, those are the ones you'll be laying in bed and you'll be thinking about what someone said. It's just the way that negative ideas work in our mind. You can hear "great job" 100 times, and you have one person that says, "Yeah, it wasn't really my favorite," and it sticks with you. So there's that aspect of it. Oh, sorry, the coughing. So with all of those considerations, people still turn on the camera and want to be a public person that is speaking out against Watchtower. Now, I don't know if that is activism in and of itself, but I was trying to think of a way to correlate this thought that was in my head. And the best thing, and I don't want it to sound self-serving, but it was the best thing I could think of. If you can think of a different one, let me know, because this one's kind of dog. But I think seeing is believing, and that is why representation in media is a fairly important thing. So whatever you think about Tiger Woods, people see Tiger Woods playing golf. And young black kids all over America, or maybe all around the world, thought to themselves, I always thought golf was kind of dorky. Maybe I will go play some golf myself. The Williams sisters. Maybe there were a lot of black kids that thought, tennis, I don't really play tennis or anything like that. And they see them succeeding and being at the very top of the sport and think, hey, maybe that's actually kind of cool. Maybe that's actually kind of fun. That can be inspirational because seeing is believing. Now, do they have to go and become this apex predator athlete? Not at all. But just seeing someone that looks like you or that has a similar shared experience as you, has dealt with some of the problems that maybe you have dealt with yourself, and you see them succeed, it helps you visualize ways in which you could succeed as well. And that's why representation is so important. Not to get too distracted here, but I don't like when representation is shoehorned in or becomes performative in a way. If they wanted to say, hey, let's make some new John Wayne movies and let's cast Will Smith, I'm just like, do we really need to do that? But instead, why not just make The Wild Wild West or something? Maybe that was a terrible example, because now I'm just thinking I Am Legend was a remake from a different movie. Anyway, but you take my point. When it's shoehorned in, it just seems performative, at least in my personal opinion. But we don't have to go all there, because that has nothing to do with anything that I'm talking about. But I do think that there is some value in the inspiration that seeing someone put themselves out there has for other people to think, hey, if they're putting themselves out there making a YouTube video and there's tens of thousands of people that watch every single week, maybe a few of those people are going to be motivated to make their own YouTube videos. Maybe they want to make posts on their social media, and their group, the tentacles of their social sphere is going to have a different reach than what anyone else might have. They might want to start uploading stuff on TikTok, whatever the case might be. They maybe go to a local convention site where the Jehovah's Witnesses hold their conventions and tell them about some of their practices. Hey, do you really want to let them have their convention here? All of these various different ways in which people can be involved, I feel like could be supported or at least inspired by what people might see on YouTube. So, is an activist the person that inspires the real activist? Maybe that's just a question for philosophers to work out. But I think I maybe have molded my my opinion of that a little bit, just because I do think there is slightly more merit to that than I originally thought. And I think maybe a lot of you guys have noticed with my content here the last few months, I've been trying to grow up a little bit in certain respects and try and take things a little bit more seriously to the best of my ability. Of course, I am who I am, and I like making the stuff that I like making, so the laughs are always very important, but I've tried to get a little more mature with some of the things that I've been putting out there, and I think that's important, because if I am here trying to do my little part on my little corner of the internet, I guess while I'm here I should take it as seriously as possible, because who knows, it could inspire someone else. So anyway, that is about all I have for this video. I thought it was kind of interesting to look at the effects that apostates are having, because when we look at how Watchtower has responded to the overwhelming increase in people that are speaking out against them, and we see them shifting and changing and losing and lying and rebranding, I think it's a good indicator that the apostates are winning. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, be kind, and don't forget to show yourself the same kindness that you show to others. And you better.